Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing my 2018 reading in review. This is the third time I'm filming this video because every time I do it, I don't like the way it comes out. But I'm trying one last time. I was planning to do one of those really detailed stats-filled videos looking at my reading in the previous year, and I had all of my stats calculated and collected and everything, but every time I talked about it, it never turned out the way that I wanted. I'm gonna go a little less in depth. It's just gonna be a brief overview of my reading in the previous year. So first up, we have the number of books that I read in 2018. I read 90 books last year, which is a lot for me. I think the year before that I read 74 books, so I have increased from one year to the other. I don't think I've probably ever read 90 books in a year, although I've only really been tracking my reading for the last maybe 3 years or so, but I highly doubt I've read 90 books before, so that was quite exciting for me that I've reached 90. I think part of why I was able to reach 90 books was because I started listening to audiobooks in the second half of the year, and that really increased the number of books that I read each month, and that really helped me to reach 90 books in the year. So of the 90 books that I read in 2018, 28 of them were audiobooks, so 62 were physical books. So actually, if I didn't have the audiobooks, then I would have probably read fewer books last year than I did the year before, but with the audiobooks I read more. Of the 90 books that I read in 2018, 58 of them were fantasy books, which I am not surprised that a large percentage of the books that I read were fantasy because that's my favorite genre. Only 8 of the books that I read were science fiction. My average star rating for the year was 3.3 stars, which I actually feel like maybe it should have been a little bit lower than that considering how I felt about my reading year as a whole. Maybe just like at an even 3 stars. That probably would sum up how I felt about my year. I feel like I had a pretty mediocre reading year, really. Only 2 of the books that I read last year got 5 stars, which, like, I don't give out 5 stars super easily, but still, like, 2 books, to me, a 3-star rating is a pretty mediocre rating. The star rating system, you know, everyone knows it's very subjective, and it's hard to really know what it means for each individual person. To me, 3 stars is a very middle of the road mediocre kind of book. Maybe it's very forgettable or it has some problems to it, but it wasn't like the worst. If the book is the first book in a series and it gets 3 stars, that usually means that I am not going to be continuing that series because it wasn't interesting enough to continue. Anyways, that's just to kind of give context about how I think about a 3-star rating. So 3.3 is not like a super exciting star rating for me. So that was a little summary of my reading, and then I wanted to look at some of the goals that I had set for myself at the beginning of 2018 and see if I accomplished those goals. I went back and rewatched my reading resolutions, essentially my goal setting video for the year, and looked to see if I reached those goals, and some of them yes, some of them no. So the first one that I had was to read 30 books in 2018, which I definitely accomplished because I read 90, so I greatly surpassed my 30 book mark, which is good. The next goal that I have, I'm not completely sure if I finished because the way I phrased it in the video was kind of ambiguous as to what I meant. So there is a reading challenge that my friend and I do every year. My friend Abby and I put together a list of kind of categories for types of books to read, like a book you've previously abandoned, a book over 500 pages, a, you know, romance novel, something like that, as a way to kind of expand our reading and push us to make sure we read things throughout the year, and maybe read something that we wouldn't usually pick up and stuff like that. And the way the rules for it work, we kind of made up rules for it. We don't have to fill out every single category in order to successfully completed the challenge. I don't think we ever quite set exactly how many you needed to have filled out in order for it to have been a success. So like, we're just gonna count it as a win. The one part of that though that I did not succeed in was the science fiction through the decades challenge. So one of the things that we did for that was that we were each supposed to pick a genre, and then we would read a book from that genre, one book published each decade from the 50s to the 90s. And so I picked science fiction, and I was doing my science fiction through the decades challenge, and I read the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s book, but I did not quite get to the 90s. The book that I had for that was The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell, and I do still plan to read that book, but I did not read it in the time limit to have completed that challenge, so I did not get that part of the challenge done. The next goal that I had for myself was to reread books, but that is another one that I didn't quite accomplish because in 2018 I reread 11 books, which isn't bad, so I did definitely reread, but the year before I reread 14 books, so my rereading went down a little bit in 2018. I did have a list that I mentioned in that video of books that I wanted to reread, and I did get to a couple of those. One of the books that I wanted to read, or at least a series actually, was I wanted to complete the Seven Waters series. I wanted to read the last 3 books in that series, which I did do, so that's good. And then I also wanted to reread The Fairy Godmother by Mercedes Lackey, which I also read. But I did not get to The Charmed Sphere by Catherine Nazaro or The Rune Lords by David Farland. So those are some rereads that I still have yet to do. I also had a goal to read some of the used books that I had recently gotten, and I don't think that I've read any of the used books that I have, so I need to work on that. The next goal though I did accomplish, which was to unhaul books, and I did at least 2 pretty big unhauls, I think. I think I unhauled like 80 something books in 2018, so I definitely did that one. Then the next goal I had was to read more poetry in 2018, which I did do because I read 8 books of poetry in 2018, and in 2017 I had read 4 books of poetry, so I doubled the amount of poetry books that I read, although I still kind of wish that I had gotten to more poetry in 2018, but you know, future goals, always growing. And I also had a goal to read more nonfiction in 2018, which I did because in 2017, I don't think I read any nonfiction, but in 2018, I read 6 books of nonfiction. So I definitely got to that one, and I'm hoping that I will continue to read more nonfiction. The next goal that I had set for myself was to read more diversely in 2018, which I did accomplish. In 2017, I read 14 books that had a main character or prominent side character that were diverse in some way. In 2018, I read 36 books that had a main character or prominent side character that were diverse in some way. And that was defined relatively loosely. So I went from, in 2017, about 1/5 of the books that I was reading were diverse, and then in 2018, about 1/3 of the books that I was reading were diverse. And so that's something that I can continue to grow in and read more diversely, but I'm glad to see that that is a goal that I reached, in that I did increase the number of diverse books that I was reading. And then I had 2 channel goals that were related to my upload schedule. The first was just to continually post throughout the year, which I did do. Sometimes it was a little sporadic, but I did post throughout the entire year of 2018. And then the other goal that I had was to post a video once a week throughout the year. And that is one that I was a little more spotty on. For a while I was doing really well. I think for the first half of the year I was relatively consistent about posting like once a week, but then in the second half of the year that fell apart a little bit. So that is all for my 2018 reading in review. It was a bit of a mediocre year for me, not in terms of the number of books that I read, because I'm quite pleased that I read 90 books, but in terms of how much I liked what I was reading, it was a little mediocre. But I hope that you had a really great 2018. I hope you loved the books that you read last year. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!